All right, hi guys. I'm going to be looking at culture and the impact it can have on gender equality across the world. Um, so, kind of just to give like a basic understanding of what gender inequality or equality can really mean on a global scale, I've just found some facts and statistics that I think really show the wide range of what equality can really mean. Because I think in the US, we mostly just focus on like the pay gap, and there's a lot more to equality than that. So here are just some things that were provided by the United Nations for this past year that they found. So there are 18 countries where husbands can prevent their wives from working. There are 39 countries where boys and girls have unequal rights to inheritance. There are 49 countries where there is no kind of domestic violence protection in their legislation. And the representation in national parliaments across the world is only 23.7% for women. And then still, there are 15 million girls who are under the age of 18 that are forced into marriage every year. And then of women between 14 and 49, 35% have experienced some form of sexual violence. So providing equality isn't necessarily trying to make it where men and women are represented at the same percentage in everything. It's just simply providing equal access and equal opportunity for men and women so that they have the same opportunities, and also just to promote a healthy society in general. So looking at the data that I used and kind of what it means, what it was telling us, the first one was the Women, Business, and the Law 2019, A Decade of Reform. So this data looked at 187 countries over a 10-year time span, and it gave each country an index score for that year based on how equal it was in relation to the questions that the study was asking. And basically, it looked at the influence of legislation on career opportunities for women. So there are 9 different life areas it looked at. And within each of those areas, a yes or no question was asked in regards to whether that country allowed or had some kind of law in place that basically created greater equality for men and women. So we'll get more into that later in class, but that's just kind of the basic of what this data was showing. Some of the results from that, there were 6 countries that scored 100, which means that of the 35 questions asked over the 9 different topic points, they answered yes to every question, meaning that they had some kind of law in place for each question being asked. Then the range of the scores was from 25.63 to 100, like these top 6. But the lowest was in Saudi Arabia. So their score results from the fact that of the 35 questions asked, only 9 they were able to answer yes, that they had laws in place for those specific things. So it shows you the wide range of equality, like in the world, that we are all the way at 25 in one place and 100 in others. And then the average for 2019, the average global score was 74.71. 10 years ago, it was 70.06. So obviously, like in those 10 years, we've made improvement in what can be considered equal based on these data points that were evaluated. So that's good. And then also that means that there were 131 economies that made reform around 274 reforms. It was also found that in reforming economies, there was increased labor participation by women, and women were seen working and joining the workforce more than in non-reforming economies, and that they were also paid better in those economies. So simply just like contributing to the quality of life, providing more opportunities, and like helping or impacting the economy. And then there were 54 countries that made no reforms at all. And then of that, there were 2 countries who actually made laws moving in the opposite direction. So in Bahrain, husbands were designated as the head of the family, and the wife was required to obey them. And then the wife could only leave for work outside of the home when it was specified by her husband. And then in Uzbekistan, there are mandatory retirement ages, but they are unequal for men and women. So it just kind of shows that even some countries are kind of moving in the opposite direction in some way. But from this data, we see that there is improvements being made, but there's also a lot to be learned from this data itself. So here are the 9 different areas that the Women, Business, and the Law data evaluated. I'll be focusing on the first 3, going places, starting a job, and getting paid. Later on in my study, I just focused on those 3 to kind of narrow it down and for the study and for my comparison. And then I also found this data later on, so I incorporated it just to kind of get another comparison, because it also is evaluating a gender gap and equality, but it's evaluating different things than the Women, Business, and the Law did. So it only evaluated 149 countries, and then the score each country is given was on a 0 to 1 scale versus a 0 to 100 for the WBL, the Women, Business, and the Law. It evaluated 4 sub-indexes, which those include economic participation and opportunity, so the number in the workforce and in higher paying jobs. Educational attainment, so the access to and actual participation in education. Political empowerment, so the representation in political decision making. And then health survival, so looking at the sex ratio at birth, so whether more boys or girls are being born, and then life expectancy based on violence, disease, malnutrition, things like that. So within those 4 sub-indexes, there are also 14 measurements among those to kind of dig in a little bit deeper to those subjects and to figure out what to evaluate those on. So that just kind of shows a little bit how the Global Gender Gap Report was analyzing still inequality, but looked at a little bit different things than the Women, Business, and the Law. And then as you can see, its range was from 0.499, which was Yemen, to 0.858 in Iceland. So a little bit different variance in its range from the WBL, but still similar. Then you can see from the results on the right that the overall average for the global performance was 68%, which is lower compared to the WBL, but still comparative. And then there were 89 countries that made improvements from the previous year. And then you can see that educational attainment and health and survival are significantly higher than that of economic participation and political empowerment. So it really shows where the country is considered, or the world is considered, more equal, and where there is still a lot of room for improvement in these areas. Then lastly, I evaluated based on culture with the Hofstede data that we looked at in class. So we all kind of have a little bit of a background on this just from using it in class, but basically it evaluated 76 countries in relation to their culture and whether they were on one side or the other. So just going through this really quick, collectivism and individualism. Collectivism is more like being part of a close group and being loyal to those people, versus an individualistic society having an I identity and looking after themselves before others. In a large power distance, that means that inequality among superiors and peers is considered normal, where a smaller power distance means that inequality is considered wrong, and that there should be rules and order, but that there should still be freedoms. Then in a feminine society, there is no or little role separation between men and women, where in a masculine society, gender roles are more distinct and there is a definite divide. The extent to which members feel threatened by unknown situations is uncertainty avoidance. So avoidant cultures feel more stress, anxiety regarding unknown things and what could happen in the future. And a tolerant society accepts life as it comes and welcomes change and sees it as a good thing. Long-term orientation is similar to uncertainty avoidance, in which one extreme welcomes change and prepares for the future, whereas the other sixth tradition and what's always been known from the past, an indulgent society sees it as good to be free and have control of one's life and to have a positive outlook on life, while a restrained society sees life as hard and that having a purpose is not as important as having freedom. So just like thinking about what these descriptions of each culture mean, you can make assumptions about how a more equal society, what kind of culture it might have, and like vice versa, thinking about what these are saying. So then here I just did a little comparison of the women business in the law versus the global gender gap, just to kind of see where the average for each region of the world, how it compared on the two scales in terms of equality. So although there is a little bit of variation, they're still fairly close to each other's scores. So I think that's interesting because even though they're evaluating different things and looking at a little bit different areas, the average score for the regions was still relatively same in terms of equality as a whole. And then also just to kind of dig into that a little deeper, these are the top 10 scoring countries for each study. And although some of them are similar, some of them are different on each, most of them are all in Europe, which is also something that's interesting. But so that's just like a little bit more of a comparison of these two studies compared to each other. That's all I have for my introductory part of that. I'll be looking a little bit more at the Hofstede and digging into this data more in class to really see the comparison and whether culture really does have an impact. So that's all I have for now. And then we'll talk more in class.